Conference of Bharata Vidya Charcha Kendra Bardhaman. The theme for this year's annual conference is Interrogating Societal Crisis and Configuring Responses, Indian Perspectives. From 3 p.m. onwards, we have had one session. And in that session, we have had a couple of very well-known figures. And we have also had the unveiling of the book of which we had for the 18th annual conference. We have also listened to one of our esteemed resource persons, which is Professor Kaushiki Dashgupta. In this session, which is scheduled from now and will run for close to 2 hours, the sub-theme which is there is health crisis. And we shall be having with us for this session not only some paper presenters, but also 2 very esteemed speakers. The first of them is Dr. Saurav Kumar Rai, who is Senior Research Assistant, Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, Teen Murti House, New Delhi. And then we shall be hearing at a later stage Dr. Tinni Goswami, who is Assistant Professor and Head, Department of History at St. Xavier's College, Autonomous, Kolkata. Our first speaker, Dr. Saurav Kumar Rai, is actually a very well-known person. And while introducing him, I might as well say that Dr. Saurav Kumar Rai has done his MPhil and PhD from the History Department, University of Delhi, on Social History of Health and Medicine under the supervision of late Dr. Vismayapati. His monograph, titled Ayurveda, Nation and Society, United Provinces, about 1890 to 1950, is scheduled to be published by Orion Black Swan in 2021 under the prestigious series of York University, New Perspectives in South Asian History. He has several articles to his credit in reputed journals, including Indian History, Indian Economy and Social History Review, History and Sociology of South Asia, Gandhi Mark, and Social Scientist. He is also author of an undergraduate history textbook titled Debating Modern India History, which was published this year from Manak Publications. At present, as we have already said, he is working as Senior Research Assistant at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, Teen Murti House, New Delhi. Dr. Rai today will be speaking to us on indigenous medicine and the issue of public health in colonial India. It is now my great pleasure to ask Dr. Rai to kindly deliver his lecture. Dr. Saurav Kumar Rai, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks a lot, sir, for that generous introduction. I would begin by thanking Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra for their kind invitation to this seminar, which appears to be quite promising. And I would also like to extend my regards to Arjuma, who, first of all, he was the person who contacted me for this organization, for this seminar, and also Shayantani, who later on looked after various technicalities related to this seminar. So in next half an hour or so, I shall be speaking on indigenous medicine and public health issue in colonial India. At the very outset, I want to read a statement by J.C. Ferguson. Ferguson was the Undersecretary to the Government of India in Home Medical Department in 1907. And in one of his letters, he was responding to G. Bomford, who was Director General of Indian Medical Services. And actually, this Director DG IMS, or Director General of Indian Medical Services, had come up with a suggestion that we need to employ Vads and Hakims for public health purposes. And to this suggestion, J.C. Ferguson, who was, as I said, Undersecretary, he made a very remarkable comment. And I'm actually quoting from his letter, where he says that, quote begins, when Western medicine in India is so much in need of funds, it seems a waste of money to subsidize systems which belong to the dark ages. It may be politic, however, not to refuse the small degree of recognition suggested, and as Director General recommends these proposals, we may accept them. So this statement of Ferguson very clearly brings out the inherent tensions in colonial public health policy so far as indigenous medical systems were concerned. Uh, we need to remember that by second half of 19th century, colonial state came to develop a certain kind of disdain against indigenous medical practices and various systems related to it. And this was largely because just keep in mind that that 1835 and Macaulay's minute, so that was the watershed year in Indian history, because after this orient Anglicist opinion won against the Orientalist perceptions or Orientalist considerations. So after 1835, we see a gradual shift in the entire policy of the colonial government, where they developed a kind of disdain not only against the indigenous medical systems but against all sorts of indigenous knowledge. So we see that disdain, and also they were more interested, that's why, in promoting Western medicine, and there was a pragmatic reason behind that also. And in fact, David Arnold, Mark Harrison, in their pioneering works in 1990s, they have shown that how this Western medicine was very much complicit with with colonialism or imperialist project. So because of that, they wanted to promote Western medicine and not indigenous medical systems. But despite this, they could not ignore the claim of indigenous medicine completely. The colonial state, they could not ignore it completely, and there were two broad reasons behind that. Uh, the very first reason was the pragmatic compulsions of the colonial state. You see, colonial state was following a kind of Victorian notion of minimalist kind of expenditure in health sector. They didn't want to invest much in health, and that's why the progress of or the expansion of Western medical setup was quite slow in the Indian context. And after all, that was the colonial state, and why would they invest in health and medicine? And that was quite understandable at the same time. Irrespective of their entire idea of civilizing mission and all, they didn't want to invest wastefully in expansion of public health system. So as late as first decade of 20th century, almost 84% of the Indian population was still following uh, still resorting to non-Western medical healing practices. So whether it was Ayurveda or Unani or various folk healing practices, they were resorting to that because there was very little expansion of Western medical health infrastructure. At the same time, we also need to remember this in the this is the era of pandemic. We all are facing it actually, and but beginning from 1817, Indian subcontinent actually witnessed an entire century of pandemics. And so it began with the cholera pandemic, then later on Bardhaman fever, malaria, cholera, then plague of 1890s, then the Spanish influenza of 1918. So we have a series of epidemics we can see, and in that context of epidemics, outbreak of epidemics, colonial government needed medical practitioners to look after the subject population, because simply because if there is massive impact of these pandemics on the indigenous population, that could lead to lawlessness, or that could brought down the entire uh, basically the entire infrastructure of law and various other setups which were created by colonial state. So they, in these times of distress, they were bound to invite Ayurvedic practitioners or Unani practitioners, so Vaids and Hakims, for a kind of in a way of temporary measure. At the same time, there was yet another pragmatic compulsion. Many of the doctors who were trained in Western medicine, they were not very much willing to go to the remote areas or mufassil towns. They were focusing more on presidency cities. So they were concentrated primarily on this Calcutta or present day Kolkata or Bombay or Chennai. So they were basically concentrated on these presidential towns, and they were not very much ready. These trained Western medical practitioners, they were not ready to go to the rural hinterland or in even in the Mufassil towns. So, and we all are celebrating actually 1920. This 2021 is also the centenary year celebration of one very noted Hindi novelist, Phanishwar Nath Renu, and he, in his remarkable novel Mela Achal, actually hints towards this reluctance by the Western medical practitioners to go to the rural areas. And because in this novel, the protagonist uh, Prashant, who was also known as Dr. Babu, when he decided to go to rural area and impart his services, then most of his colleagues actually mocked him. And they actually started deeming him as a kind of emotional fool or a kind of crazy person. So that kind of reluctance was also there. So colonial state had to take the services of these vets or hakims for basically for the purpose of public health system in rural India. And then after this Montfort reform, or what is also known as Montagu-Chelmsford reforms of 1919, provincial bureaucracy expanded tremendously. And with the expansion of this provincial bureaucracy, a sudden need appeared for registered or qualified medical practitioners. Why? And I believe most of the participants are students, but if they are there in the jobs also. So if you want to apply for this medical leave, then there is a provision that for this medical leave you have to furnish uh, a certificate by registered or qualified medical practitioner. Only on that ground you can avail that medical leave. So with the expansion of this provincial bureaucracy, a sudden increase in demand of registered or qualified medical practitioners appeared, and Western, as I said, Western medical practitioners were still not in that number that they could fill up that requirement. So these were some of the pragmatic compulsions of the colonial state, which forced it to look time and again to indigenous medical practitioners, whether it was Vaid or Hakim. Then there was second reason also why they could not ignore these systems, and that had something to do with the ongoing nationalist movement. By the late 19th century, and with the rolling down of this national movement, the idea of Swadeshi or indigeneity became suddenly very prominent or quite fashionable in that way. And in fact, this issue of indigenous medicine appeared in various Congress sessions year after year throughout the early 20th century. And that in fact, people like Hakim Ajmal Khan, who was also a prominent leader of Indian National Congress, he demanded that if we want really Swaraj or self rule, then we need to write all the things which are directly concerned with the masses in indigenous terms. So that's where he was advocating the use of more and more use of Ayurveda and Unani in that way. So this idea of Swadeshi and national movement created a kind of pressure on the colonial state. Also, early 20th century, actually the first decade of 20th century, saw the establishing of or setting up of certain institutions or certain organizations. Like, for example, in case of Ayurveda, All India Vaidya Sammelan came up in 1907. It was also known as All India Ayurvedic Congress. Then in case of Unani, Anjumane Tibbi appeared. So these organizations actually not only created an entire atmosphere of modernizing or reviving these age-old indigenous medical systems like Ayurveda and Unani, but also rallied various medical practitioners associated with this system to put a pressure on the colonial government to fund for the improvement of these systems also. So that was also there. Besides this pragmatic compulsion, this entire nationalist pressure was also there. So because of these two things, now colonial state was now into a dilemma. Ideologically it wanted to support western medicine, then on the other hand, because of certain compulsions, it had to take cognizance of indigenous medical systems also. So what it did, it very cleverly followed the policy of negligence silently. So it on its if you look at the files, then colonial government always kept on saying that they want to promote Ayurveda and Unani, but at the same time, very silently, they were not providing enough fund for that or enough support or infrastructure for that, and it became very evident when in 1920s, in the wake of Montfort reform, I'll be talking in the specific case of United Provinces. In 1924, they decided to expand the public health system in rural areas. Now, they could easily do it with enrolling vets and hakims, but they didn't do that. And in fact, they again resorted for Western medical practitioners only, or the allopathic practitioners, or those who were practicing biomedicine. Now, this entire scheme actually failed terribly because, as I said, there were not enough medical practitioners trained in biomedicine, and also they were not very much ready to go to these rural areas. And that's why district boards kept complaining that they are not getting enough medical practitioners to carry out this public health system in remote areas. So, despite this dilemma, this colonial state always followed a kind of policy of silent negligence. Now, coming to the second part of my paper, which is related to actually, it's fine that colonial state was not providing enough support to these indigenous medicine system, but how much these indigenous medical systems were appropriate or ready to take up the task of public health system, that is also one question which one need to emphasize upon. And here I would like to said popular romanticization associated with these indigenous healing systems like Ayurveda or Unani, and I'll be talking particularly about Ayurveda because that's where my expertise lies on. So uh, I would again like to quote a statement by Gandhi, and where he has shown that colonial state was not the only culprit behind this gradual decline of Ayurveda and Unani, or why state was in ultimately these systems were not uh, they could not acquire favorable position as so far as public health system was concerned. So Gandhi, as late as in 1946, at the almost independence was approaching, and so in on August 4, 1946, he said, and I'm quoting from him, I am unable to subscribe to the condemnation of the state for not providing institutions for research. I have always blamed the Vats' apathy in the matter of real research. The top ones are busy making money, the others are too ignorant to do so, or are easily satisfied with what they find in the orthodox Ayurvedic books. I am sorry for this view. I come to it in spite of my great regard for the Ayurvedic system and Unani, which are suited to the soil. So Gandhi very categorically is saying here that despite being the champion of Swadeshi and Swaraj and everything, he was he understood that these Ayurvedic practitioners and Unani practitioners, they actually, he went on to go at some other place. He said that they are lacking this spirit of inquiry. And also, those who are worthy enough in these systems, they are more busy in making money. And here he had a very heated conversation with Gananath Sen, who was the prominent Ayurvedic practitioner of Bengal. So, and in fact, he tried to experiment with his satyagrahi scientist concept in the case of Ayurveda with Ballav Ram Ved, but it failed. So, uh, indigenous medical practitioners, if you look at their entire discourse, especially in the context of various issues related to public health, then it manifested various kinds of caste, class, gender, and community oriented predilections. And again, I'll be, as I said earlier, I'll be focusing specifically in the case of Ayurvedic discourse of colonial North India, particularly United Provinces, because that was one major center of Ayurvedic revivalist movement. So I'll take some of the illustrative examples for this, that how these predilections can be seen in this Ayurvedic discourse when it comes to various issues of public health. One very important issue of public health of that time was the issue of sanitation. The colonial state always blamed Indians for having dirty habits and insanitary kind of living style. And in fact, it went on to saying that it's because of the dirty living habits of Indians that we frequently see outbreak of epidemics in beginning precisely from the Indian subcontinent. Now, Ayurvedic practitioners of 20th century, they very cleverly replaced this kind of racial interpretation of the colonial state with the one which was based on caste and class interpretation. So what they said, if you go through the Ayurvedic discourse of the time, then on more than one place you can find that they are saying that it's not about all Indians, it's primarily because of the people of lower caste and class that they are having this dirty and insanitary habits. So how this racial interpretation was actually replaced by the one based on caste and class prejudices. In fact, barbers and dhobi or washermen, they were attacked particularly in this entire discourse, and there is a text called Dadru Chikitsa, which was devoted particularly regarding the cure of dermatophytosis or ring. And despite acknowledging it's being caused by fungi, it went on to put the entire blame on barbers and wassermen for its spread. So that was one thing. Then if you come to the issue of epidemics, which was one major issue of public health of that entire century of 1817 to 1918, then there also uh, there is an interesting example. I talked about this All India Vaidya Sammelan being set up in 1907, which was a kind of representative body of these modern new Veds. So it set up a commission to inquire into the causes of epidemics or pandemics. Now, so it inquired about everything, cholera, plague, or other kinds of epidemics. And one of its member was Rai Puranchand. Now, Rai Puranchand came up with a very interesting theory regarding the outbreak of plague epidemic. He argued that there is a plague specific poison which he termed as pad sangharsan vish. So vish is basically poison. So what he said, that this plague specific poison gets generated when you walk barefooted on earth. So because of the friction between bare feet and earth, this plague specific poison gets generated and enters inside the earth. And when it gets excessively accumulated inside the earth, it comes out and causes plague epidemic. So that was it was a theory which was propounded by Rai Puranchand, and it came into a form of a booklet also, which was titled as Plague Darpan. Now, if you notice, uh, then you will find that who were these people who were walking barefooted. Then again, the target was primarily to people belonging to lower caste and class and women who were basically walking barefooted. And because people from upper caste and class, they mostly use either wooden sandals known as khadao in United Provinces, or leather sandals or shoes. So that was the issue of epidemic disease so far as public health was concerned. Then come to the issue of midwives or dyes, or the issue of wet mothers. That was also one very prominent public health issue of the time, because colonial state always went on to demonize Indian midwives to explain the higher child mortality rate of India. So, and that was the ground behind the entire setting up of Dufferin Fund and everything. So, colonial state always argued that these traditional midwives, Indian midwives, they are the main villains behind this entire story of higher mortality, child mortality rate. And actually, we need to professionalize these midwives. We need to train them. So now Ayurvedic practitioners readily adopted this colonial discourse regarding the midwives, and they also emphasized the necessity of sarkari training, or the training by the state of midwives. And not only this, there was a twist also. When colonial state was arguing for professionalization of midwives, then they were trying to train the same midwives who were existing in the modern way of childbirth. But Ayurvedic practitioners, when they were arguing for this training, professionalization of midwives, then they were saying that uh, women, or particularly widows from Hindu family, Hindu high caste family, they should come up and take up this profession. So again, this caste angle came up there in the Ayurvedic discourse, so far as the professionalization of midwives was concerned. Similar was the case with vet mothers also. There was an Ayurvedic text known as Santati Shastra. Santati Shastra was also the generic term for Ayurvedic child care tracts, where they argued that one should always employ a vet mother or dhai from one's own caste. So a Brahmin family should always employ a Brahmin dhai or vet mother, or a Kshatriya family should always employ a Kshatriya uh, vet mother. Similar and so far and so forth. So again, another pertinent issue in the eyes of colonial state, so far as public health system was concerned, was related to homosexuality, because colonial state in many ways was homophobic in that way. And Anjali Arundekar and others, they have pointed it out, Ruth Vanita and others, they have worked on it. So colonial state always blamed the oriental societies for this particular quote unquote disease. And but when it came to the Ayurvedic discourse, again they introduced a twist, and they started saying that actually it's primarily because of the Muslim Nawabs and rurals that we see the phenomena of homosexuality in India, and that has been there in Jagannath Sharma's Arogya Darpan. This idea was propagated. So again, the entire thing was uh, seen in a communal light. So these were some of the various public health related issues. And if you look at the opinion of Ayurvedic practitioners of the time on these issues, then you will find that they exhibited very clearly various caste, class, gender, and community oriented predilections. Now, moving to the concluding part of my paper, uh, let's analyze in a more objective manner that how fit these indigenous medical systems were in addressing modern public health issues. So there we have to go into some of the conceptual basis of Ayurveda. Now, if you look at Ayurveda, we are focusing on Ayurveda only for the time being, then it has very much individual centric perspective, in a way that if a patient is suffering from a particular disease and he approaches a Vaid, then he will start asking various kinds of questions to him, that what is your daily routine, what kind of job you have, and based on that he prescribes a very personalized kind of remedy. So Ayurveda doesn't work like Western medicine, that if you have fever then everyone should be given PCM or paracetamol. Ayurveda works on different mechanism. For in Ayurveda, every patient is unique in that way. So there, the individual centric approach is there. Later on, Ayurvedic practitioners in the era of this pharmaceuticalization and all, they tried to actually they tried to come up with some standardized remedies, but that was very minimal in that way. Now, if you go to the second idea, then Ayurveda doesn't allow very quick remedy in that way. How so? If there is an epidemic like situation, then state always wants any quick remedy. Ayurveda works more on vitalizers or tonics to improve your immunity, and they won't provide you quick relief. So if you look at modern public health system, then it relies largely on quick relief, because that is the issue related with law and order. If because the spread of disease is it was quite swift in modern era. So if you won't control it then and there, then it may create havoc for the entire law and order system. So there also these indigenous medical systems were lacking, because they were more focused on improving this immunity and other things through various vitalizers and tonics. So I would stop here. So the basic idea is the same, that it's fine that colonial state, they were deliberately avoiding to promote these systems, but at the same time, these how much appropriate these systems were to address various public health issues is also that one needs to examine. Thanks very much.
Dr. Saurav Kumar Rai. We are absolutely honored to have heard you over the last 30, 35 minutes. And your presentation has really been very unique, and we are very grateful to you for having uh, talked about the indigenous medicines and how they have got into the whole aspect of treating people over a large period of time over the last 200 years nearly that you have talked about. We now are going to quickly shift on to Dr. Tinni Goswami, who is assistant professor of history at St. Xavier's College, Kolkata. We have already met her a couple of minutes ago. Okay, Dr. Goswami, I'll just, as is the usual norm, I shall be introducing Dr. Goswami. Dr. Tinni Goswami has done her master's and PhD from Jadavpur University and has written a thesis in 2011 from New Delhi. She has numerous national and international publications and has toured Europe and other Asian countries to present her research papers. She was a junior research fellow of Indian Council of Historical Research from 2006 to 2008 and the fellow of the Asiatic Society from 2010 to 2013. Dr. Goswami was a UGC Research Associate at Women's Studies Center, Research Center, University of Calcutta from 2013 to 2014. Presently, she is an assistant professor and the head of Department of History, St. Xavier's College Autonomous, Kolkata, Raghapur campus. She is also working as a part-time faculty at the PG Department Evening of History, Jadavpur University. Her areas of research interests are history of gender, cultural and regional history, history of science, technology and religions, history of public health, and history of education in West Bengal. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is now our great pleasure to listen to Dr. Tinni Goswami. Ma'am, please.
Thank you, Mr. Shomitra Roy. Thank you, Shomitra Babu, for this nice introduction of mine. I would like to thank Bharatiya Vidya Charcha Kendra for giving me this opportunity to showcase my research and also to chair a session where I can hear the budding social scientists, their perceptions on various topics. And my special thanks to Mr. Domrupani Bhattacharya for contacting me, and as he is like my brother, so it's really what I can say, a wonderful experience to be a part of this venture, and I wish a great success to the organizers. So my paper is on the controversies regarding vaccination, and as all of us know that we are passing through a very crucial situation right now. We are passing through the corona pandemic, and this grave situation is definitely is like something which is remarkable in the case of like how our lifestyle has been changed to a great extent and how we are trying to cope up with the new normal. So I would like to like to make a comparative study with the smallpox vaccination, which took place during the colonial period in India, and also it had an impact in the medical history of England. That will be also part of my lecture. And I would also try to make a connection between the situations which existed during the colonial times and right now we are passing through more or less the same situation of anxiety, of fear, of terror. So from that point of view, I think that it would be like an experience for me to explore all these avenues and also to find out that the probable areas of research which perhaps help the students or the researchers in future. So the title of my paper is, hope I'm audible. Shomitra Babu, am I audible?
Yes, please. Yeah, yes, ma'am. But just keep the
Okay, thank
microphone
you.
a little bit away from the mouth because I think there is a small sound which is coming through
Okay,
otherwise. Okay, we can
okay,
hear you
okay.
as it
So
is.
now it's
Okay.
fine. It's fine.
Yes, it's okay, ma'am.
It's fine,
Please
I guess.
continue.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
please.
Thank you so much. So the title of my paper is Exploring the Politics Behind Vaccination in India, the Colonial Legacy Revived, a comparative study based on smallpox and COVID-19. The essential theme of this paper is to situate the discourses on public health in the domain of mass response and the role of the government to understand the complexities and the tensions as the offshoots of the elements which shook the nation. This paper is an analytical appraisal of the unpleasantness caused by the smallpox epidemics during the colonial times and also the COVID 19 situation at present, which has taught us to cope up with the new normal. My approach towards this particular problem is pessimistic, as the critical thinking of mine, based on the sources which I have referred, perhaps compelled me to harp on one question: can we reconstruct, restructure, or rethink our entire researches on public health again in the context of colonial Bengal or India? Secondly, what were the public, where were the public in the public health policies of the British government? I'm repeating, where were the public in the public health policies of the British government? And finally, how the colonizers define or documented public in their official papers. I'm repeating again, how the colonizers define or documented public, quote unquote, in their official papers. If we consider the historiography of public health by the national and the international academicians all over the world, then we find binary versions of the colonial rule, indicating towards the demonic avatar of the British Raj, or to some, the British rule brought a complete package of wellness, uplifting our moral standard and our reliance on Western culture and language is not the legacy, rather the tribute. While revisiting the days of smallpox or sharing the experiences of COVID-19 through this paper, the hypothesis which I have chalked out is prone to the perceptions of Hegel and Gramsci, and I also owe my indebtedness to Freud, especially when decoding the politics of vaccination. Here, I am not much keen to expand the discussion with the help of perhaps one of the most exhaustive theories in the field of public health discourses, which indicates the colonization of the earthly body of the natives as I believe it was the inevitability, or at that moment there was no other option left. Secondly, how Foucault connects knowledge, power, and societal institutions all together definitely has increased my inquisitiveness, but I am not comfortable to apply this approach to establish my arguments, as I found that the evidence is not The advent of the British rule tended to be a sophisticated form of the Mughal domination, or in other words, it continued the Mughal legacy. Here one can identify a notion of continuity leading towards the formation of a specific culture of domination. As for example, Edward Said, while discussing the discourse on colonialism, gave emphasis on the imperial interests of the colonizers, where culture played the role of a metaphor. Now, the question is, what is the definition of culture, quote unquote, as mentioned by Edward Said? According to Badiruddin Omar, the ruler or the imperialist often makes his own culture as a weapon of domination and concentrates for the betterment of that specific culture. This creates cultural backwardness of the colonized. This cultural dominance of the rulers was described by Gramsci as hegemony. The culture which I am trying to portray through this particular discourse can be also witnessed in the field of public health policies as implemented by the British, and it was a culture of indifference, I might say. Now the question is, what made the vaccination important during the epidemics and why was it political? Here the definition of political needs to be unearthed. If we follow Aristotle, who once stated that, within quotation, man is by nature a political animal, made us to believe that family is the smallest unit of the society or the state where we can experience the initiation of politics. Therefore, politics is normal and it is the inborn instinct. On the other, Machiavelli, in his book, The Prince, attempted to define the ideal ruler who would be harsh and cruel on the one hand and benevolent on the other. With this backdrop, I would like to discuss my understanding on the colonial vaccination policies. I want to mention the book, The Vaccination Controversy by Stanley Williamson, published in 2009 by Liverpool University Press, where we can experience the historical journey of smallpox as a disease and how the compulsory vaccination in England later became an issue where laws were enforced to vaccinate people. C.W. Dixon, in his literary work Smallpox, stated that, I quote, in England in the 19th century, vaccination was the subject of the greatest controversy in the history of medicine. There were people who objected vaccination due to the fear of side effects. Especially the parents did not want their children to get vaccinated and gave conscientious objection. There is an interesting article published in the Journal of Medical Research in 2012, where the author wrote on a brief history of vaccines and vaccination in India. I need to include the excerpt of this writing in my paper to understand the contrast between India and England before theorizing my argument. The author, with the help of the empirical evidences, highlighted, I quote, the reluctance, opposition, and slow acceptance of vaccination as the characteristics of vaccination history. There are some more writings on smallpox vaccination in India which need to be mentioned here. For example, the article by Luke Juran and others titled Considering the Public in Public Health, Popular Resistance to the Smallpox Eradication Program in India, which was published in Indian Journal of Medical Ethics in 2017, had a detailed discussion on, I quote, forcible vaccination and quarantine in many cases, contributing towards the criticalities of the present discourse. Another article by Sonia Dave, namely Smallpox Vaccination in Early Colonial India, Diversity in Resistance, published in 2018, analytically drew the sources of tensions between the colonizers and and colonized in regard of smallpox vaccination, which perhaps useful to construct my own hypothesis of the politics of vaccination. Dave tried to establish her arguments based on, I quote, rivalry between vaccination and variolation, indicating the tussle between biomedicine and indigenous medicine, religious superstitions, and protest raised by the Brahmin inoculators. There are two books which definitely enrich my understanding and worth sharing. These are such as The Global Eradication of Smallpox, edited by Sanjoy Bhattacharya and Sharon Messenger, published in 2010, and Fractured States, Smallpox, Public Health and Vaccination Policy in British India, 1800 to 1947, authored by Mark Harrison, Sanjoy Bhattacharya, and Michael Warboys, published in 2005. As we have already enough researches on smallpox vaccination, we need to have more comparative studies of the East and the West to make the specific discourse more political. And also, in my opinion, a comparison with the present situation would surely enhance our knowledge of medical history. The official documents which I have referred for this paper are from the vaccine collection of the Digital Archives of National Library of Scotland, starting from 1856 to 1933, documenting transformation from variolation to improved vaccination techniques, logistics of limb supply, funding, and staffing. I would like to quote from an official report of 1868, where the native apathy for vaccination was clearly stated. I quote, all kinds of fears seized the minds of the natives that he, within bracket, the sub-assistant surgeon, wanted to steal the children for some purposes of witchcraft, or to send them away as coolies to some other British possessions, and that to this end they were vaccinated by way of setting the government mark up on them so that they might be readily traced when wanted by the police. Unquote. In another official report on vaccination in Bengal in 1900 in another official report on vaccination in Bengal in 1906-7, it was stated that, I quote, the decrease in primary vaccination is due to the high prices of food grains which prevailed during the year and which made the poorer classes of the people reluctant to offer their children for vaccination owing to difficulty or inability to pay vaccination fees. So
Yes,
J.R.
please.
Bedford wrote in 1853, I quote, there is an urgent requirement of the public health that protection of some kind should be universally diffused and made compulsory. Unquote. He also opined, I'm quoting Bedford again, taking the peculiar circumstances of Bengal into account, it may be more desirable to omit vaccination altogether in that province and to substitute systematic inoculation properly superintended. No effectual sanitary progress can be made in India until the government establish a system of death registrations for the principal towns of each zilla. Sources, it is evident that the smallpox vaccination in colonial India was not free at cost, and economically challenged sections of the society were not always in a position to pay vaccination fees. Secondly, the price rise of food grains often made the situation worse, as people were ill-fed, especially the kids were malnourished, making them unfit for vaccination. The frequent occurrences of famines were also a matter of concern, as according to one of the official reports of 1906 and 7, in Darbhanga, a famine affected district, I quote, many children were so weak that vaccination could not be safely done, unquote. Thirdly, the health measures during the colonial period were not, within quote, universally implemented as Bedford opined. So these were exclusive or limited, and this particular fact seeks further investigations. Fourthly, why Bedford wanted to omit vaccination altogether in Bengal, especially in 1850s when people were drastically suffering from smallpox, and why he talked for systematic inoculation. From his statement, one can assume that the religious objections were initially so strong in Bengal that the British were reluctant to do public welfare in the name of public health, which perhaps exposed their politics of colonial indifference, which gradually set a culture. Fifthly, the system of death registrations in the districts, which was inefficient, perhaps misled the death count, and the public health measures were not uniformly implemented, causing chaos and confusions at the various administrative levels. The reports also highlighted the point that the native vaccinators were underpaid and European supervision was asked to secure their competency. Finally, according to the book Vaccination Controversy, in England, the educated people were the activists who wanted compulsory vaccination through legislations in spite of objection and fear. In India, the resistance towards smallpox vaccination was commonly suggested, but the native literary responses through the printing media in favor of vaccination needs further academic investigations, as we don't have William Farr in India, who was an ardent supporter of smallpox vaccination in England, who rightly opined in 1843, I quote, "Care must be taken to discriminate between what can be done by legislation for the people and what can only be accomplished by themselves individually and swayed by the slow progress of opinion." Unquote. I have started my discussion with the theoretical perceptions of Said, Gramsci, Aristotle, Machiavelli, and Omar. I have also tried to experiment with the subaltern approach of history from below, searching public health policies of colonial period. The title of my paper is Indicating Towards Politics of Vaccination, and with the help of the above mentioned references, I have been successful to trace the colonial politics of meagerness, discrimination, indifference, and incompetency behind the vaccination procedure, which were for me like the definitive reality decoding Hegelianism and seemed to be normal as per the dictum of Aristotle. On the other hand, the presence of specific mental blockages in the forms of religious objections perhaps give us a room to deconstruct Freud, who harped on the unconscious mind as it is responsible to control social expressions or behaviors to a great extent. Here, I feel unconscious mind can be coined with the term unaware mind, which lacks proper education. In my opinion, the colonial domination was fundamentally based on fear and owed certain components of benevolence, and by this way I can justify my projection of the prince to substantiate my argument. Lastly, do I find the presence of subtle politics behind the COVID-19 vaccination all over the world? I must say, if we read the daily newspaper, then it can be said that the pandemic is man-made and the vaccination procedure perhaps indicating towards commercial gains. The rat race for launching the first vaccine, the blame game between manufacturing pharmaceutical companies, skipping human trials are the integral features of this COVID 19 pandemic. COVID-19 vaccine procedure, transforming the medical history of 2K to 1. The politics of dearth is so prominent. Those who get vaccine nowadays are celebrating their privileged status or priority in the social networking sites. These expressions are not that much eye candy for those who are lagging behind in this rat race or competition, exposing the differences in respective social positions. Therefore, the smallpox epidemic was known to us so far the pandemic, as it happens every 100 alternative years with new diseases. In 1918, it was Spanish flu. In 2021 or in 2019, it was or still it is Corona or COVID-19. The politics behind COVID vaccination is also the historical repetition of the past, continuing the colonial legacy. Thank you so much, and I would like to apologize for some technical disturbances which were there while having my lecture, and also as I had to read some of the portions, so that's why it's not always possible for me to have that kind of looking towards the screen. But I hope that all of you enjoyed the session, and if you have any question, I will be delighted to answer. Thank you. And thank you, Soumitra Babu, and thank you, Bharatiya Vidya Charcha Kendra, for this opportunity.
We are absolutely honored, ma'am, to have heard you. It's been a wonderful, wonderful presentation on your part, very rich, and it's been very enlightening for all of us. May I please request you to stay back, because now we'll be having the presentations from the paper presenters, and we have with us five paper presenters uh, whom we will be having now on this session, which Dr. Tinni Goswami shall be chairing. They will be joining us shortly. The presenters are Dr. Shudhi Mandloy, Ms. Sharmishta Sarkar, Mr. Shaptarshu, who is a student from Scottish Church College, Mr. Shombit Roy Chaudhary, and Dr. Debomitra Chakraborty. May I please request Proloy to kindly join them into the room so that they might be making their presentations. Each of the presenters will be allowed 10 minutes for presentation, and at the end of each presentation, we'll be having a question-answer session. Proloy has just now written that the presenters have still not come. I see, so we'll have to wait for a couple of minutes. I think actually we are just a little bit ahead of time, so we are having this little bit of a technical glitch. And it's been very, very rewarding for us to hear both Dr. Saurav Kumar Rai and Dr. Tinni Goswami. Particularly with ma'am's paper, I can say that we have all these sorts of trepidations about how the vaccine might roll out for COVID-19, and a wide part of the population has, of course, is now being vaccinated. So we have our own trepidations and hesitations about the vaccination process. So listening to her regarding the previous vaccination procedures has been quite an enriching fact. And the politics of representation which goes around for vaccination, which ma'am just referred towards the end of her presentation, is also something which we are all very hesitant about. So we'll just wait for a couple of minutes and we'll see how the paper presenters come through. Ma'am, we just hope that you will be staying back for a couple of minutes. We'll just make...
Yes, sure. That will be my pleasure. And if there is any question, then you know that to Dr. Rai and also to me, because we have some spare time in our hands, then we can also attain.
So I can ask Proloy to kindly forward the questions if there are so. Okay, I don't see plenty for the moment. Okay, may I then, on behalf of everyone present over here, can I just ask you, ma'am, how do you think that when we are talking about a pandemic rolling through, how do you think that the process of vaccination, which you mentioned about, how does it impact actually the whole policy of public health, which we look at in general? That means tackling a pandemic and then vaccinating people. Is there what are the ideas which basically people have in their minds when or the government or the public health policymakers have in their minds? If you could kindly shed light on that for the moment.
Sir, thank you for this question. This is a time where we need to think about the health infrastructure which we are having. So, this is not a time to blame anyone. Neither we can blame the government nor we can blame ourselves. So, as something which is happening and all the things are not possible to control by ourselves, we have to bear the consequences. So, from that perspective, I might say the public health policy in regard of vaccination, especially right now, what we are having in post independent India, as we have a very large population, then we need more systematic interventions in this regard. And it is really difficult for a country like ours, which is unfortunately still belonging to the category of the third world, to tackle or manage with this kind of problem, or to find out a tangible solution. Number one, as the awareness level is very low. Even educated people are not that much eager to wear masks because they think like right now, as we have passed almost a year and the virulence of the disease has been decreased to some extent. So, no need for us to wear mask. Secondly, as we don't have that kind of an infrastructure or a policy so that we could vaccinate majority of the people at one time. The question is, here we find the intervention of the private health institutions or those who are getting vaccine. They are the frontline COVID warriors, definitely. But don't you find any discrepancy in this regard? All of us are frontline COVID warriors because all of us, what I feel, I may be wrong, but what I feel, all of us have to go out for our livelihood. So, from that perspective, I think that it is, or it would be better to have a broader agenda to vaccinate people at a large basis. Thirdly, what I feel like we need to do more researches on the side effects and whether the vaccines are useful or that much effective for those who are having comorbidities or who are aged, and particularly what will happen to those who are like apart from having comorbidities susceptible to facing immunity problems, and also the kids. I'm not very sure like whether we are having this kind of researches, but every day we can see many reports in the newspaper expressing contradictory views. So as media is giving us the picture which is very much confusing, and as those who are getting vaccines, I'm not very sure like who are the frontline COVID warriors at all, because all of us are fighting since last 1 year. So definitely I have a huge respect for those who are getting the vaccine, but what about those who have to go out from their home every day to have their livelihood? Do we have any plan for them? And they have to wait for their turn until and unless they have to become alive for that. So this is one of my observation, and as what the question you have raised. So what I feel that yes, the public health policies need to be more refined, but the situation is like that. We are in the third world country category, so it's not always possible for us to have the same kind of comfort or to have that same kind of facility or facilities in the field of health services. So I think that there is one question which is very much in the comment box. So,
Is
Shomitra Babu, are you there?
yes, I'm there.
So hope
There's a question which has come through. I think he's asking about the fact with regard to the British government, whether the religious diversifications which were there, they really influence vaccinations during the British era. I think that the question relates to that, because we can perhaps not generalize too much about the last part of the question. So let's try to just keep it that way. Whether religious diversifications actually did impact the process of vaccination during the British era. Would you please like to comment on that?
Yes. So, Shujit, I must say, I'm sorry, because the British government, even right now, no one who is in the authoritarian position is able to solve any kind of religious problem. And it is not at all a religious problem. Rather, it's like, that they resisted, and both the Hindus and Muslims, they had certain reservations in regard of vaccination. So it was not like that the British, they solved it, because it was not an issue to solve. Rather, to some extent, they tried to avoid the situation. And as I have already mentioned in my paper, that in an official report of 1906-7, it was mentioned that it would be better in Bengal to completely omit the vaccination procedure and to have the traditional inoculation. So perhaps this is the answer to your question, because government was hesitant or reluctant to intervene in this kind of religious issue, rather thought to omit, quote unquote, the entire vaccination procedure. So it was not the solution to any kind of religious problem, rather to avoid a social issue which might shook the basis of the British rule, what the British thought at that time.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think
I think, I think we
the
have the
paper.
first of the presenters. So we might actually allow Shoptorsho has come in already, I heard. So, ma'am, I'd request you to take over control of the proceedings. Can we please now ask our first participant, the first presenter, to come and make the presentation, please? Okay.
Good
If we
evening
have the
to all
first
of
one,
you.
please.
Yes.
Okay. So here is
Yes, am I audible?
Sudhi Mangloy. Yes, please, ma'am.
Am I audible?
Please make your presentation. Yes,
Yeah,
please.
yeah.
Okay.
Sudhi, welcome.
Yeah,
Welcome,
could you
welcome,
please
Sudhi.
introduce yourself?
Yes, this is Dr. Sudhi Mandloi, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Vishwa Bharati, respected chairperson, and my fellow participant. Today, I would like to first thank the Bharatiya Charcha Kendra for giving me this opportunity to present my paper. The title of my presentation is The Republican Party of India, Crisis of the Dalit Politics in the Post-Ambedkar Era. Now, this paper examined the crisis that emerged in the post Ambedkar Dalit politics, and it seeks to analyze the post Ambedkar Dalit movement in Maharashtra by examining its potential as a socio political movement. Now, this party, RPI, was one of the legacies of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, which was founded after his death in 1957. However, Ambedkar conceptualized the formation of RPI in the early 1950s to represent the oppressed and the disadvantaged sections of the society without regard to caste or region, and also to pose a challenge to the ruling party as an opposition. He wanted to give a new dimension to the Dalit politics by incorporating within its fold um, Dalits, tribals, backward classes, working classes, peasant classes, landless laborers, and minorities. His aim was to create a broad base to fight for the rights of all the deprived classes. Now, I argue that the Dalit politics underwent a leadership crisis due to the ideological clash and also disagreement on multiple issues in the post Ambedkar era. The RPI was plagued by intense factionalism and also lost its popularity as the political party of the marginalized section. As a result, RPI lost momentum and got deviated from its path. Now, this was not the first party of the Dalit which was founded by Dr. Ambedkar. The first party was Independent Labour Party, which was founded in 1936. The second party was All India Scheduled Caste Federation, which was founded in 1942. And this was conceptualized by Ambedkar in post-independence era. However, at the time of the cabinet mission, Cripps remarked that Dr. Ambedkar organization is somewhat more local in uh, character, being mainly centered in Bombay and central provinces, and the Congress affiliated organization is spread widely over the whole country. Now, after independence, Ambedkar realized that the scenario has changed in the post Ambedkar in the post independent era, and new strategies are required. So the aim of Ambedkar was to establish or to achieve a political unity among the different oppressed sections of the society under a single political leadership and a single political organization. So with this intention, RPI was conceptualized, but due to his sudden death in 1956, this vision could not be materialized in 1956, which he has planned. But his followers, they have founded this party in 1957. Now, since its formation, the RPI made attempt to establish itself as a non-communal party, which was dedicated to the cause of social and economic equality. And during its early years, the RPI attempted to put these ideas into practice and to create a mass movement from the below. Now, RPI endorsed that the Dalit class had to fight on two levels. The first level is that of eradicating untouchability and social inequality with the aim of establishing social equality. And the other is at the economic level, where the economic inequality is the main aim. That is, economic equality is to be achieved, because livelihood livelihood is one of the major concerns of Dalit and Adivasis. So, the first issue which was addressed by RPI in Maharashtra was the issue of the autonomous status for the state of Maharashtra. And RPI was in favor of Marathi speaking state with Bombay at its capital, and that is why they have played a crucial role in this agitation which was going on due to the entire this agitation which had emerged in Maharashtra for the linguistic reorganization of the state. So, and it was in 1960, the Maharashtra has got the autonomous status with Marathi speaking region and Bombay at its capital. Now, to consolidate its social base, the RPI emphasized on socio-economic issues, and it campaigned for land redistribution in Maharashtra for landless Dalit and non-Dalit classes, and they also emphasized on the distribution and the prices of the food grains, land nationalization, and one of the first during the first initial years, RPI devoted much attention to the problem of the landless laborers, and this was largely due to the staunch follower of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Dada Sahab Gaikwad, who has given leadership after his death to the to this party. Now, the first program or the first struggle which was started by RPI in post-independence period was the Bhumihin Satyagrah, and this Satyagrah was launched in 1953-54 under the leadership of the Dada Sahab Gaikwad, and this Satyagrah raised basically the land question, demanded the allocation of the forest land, property land, wasteland, and grazing land for landless Dalits. It also called for the abolition of bonded labor. So this particular satyagraha not only it played a crucial role in not only empowering the ex-untouchables, but also the other marginal categories irrespective of caste, class, region on the issue of land distribution. And this entire satyagraha has three phases. In the first phase, this satyagraha had begun in the two districts of Maharashtra, that is the Marathwada and Ahmednagar district. And then in the second phase, that is in the 1958-59, this satyagraha had spread to the other areas of the Maharashtra. And in the third phase, this satyagraha had spread to the different states of India. Now, throughout this satyagraha, the RPI leaders, they have played a very crucial role in mobilization of the Dalits, especially of the rural areas, and especially also the non-Dalits. So whoever were basically facing the problem of land, they got associated with this satyagraha. The women have also participated in this satyagraha in large number, and it was during the third phase of the movement. A march was planned from Lal Killa to Lok Sabha, where more than 3 lakhs satyagrahis, they have reached the Lok Sabha along with their leaders to submit their demand for the land redistribution in Maharashtra as well as in the other states. However, this satyagraha had to face atrocities of the state agencies, and especially the Dalit women, they had to face the repression of the state agencies. But after a long struggle, the RPI was successful.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Uh,
Sorry to interrupt. I think your time is over. So if you can
okay, so
come to
yeah,
your
yeah,
conclusion, that would be
yeah,
fine.
yeah. So basically, what I want to say that in the initial years, RPI leaders, they have addressed several issues, and they have also got the support of several marginalized communities. But the main reason was the factionalism which had taken place within the RPI, that is the Republican Party of India, from 1959 onwards, when the newly urban educated Dalit class, they have started challenging the older leadership, and ideological clashes had taken place between them on multiple issues, and then numerous factions have taken place within the party. The first faction was in 1959, and then 67, 64. So what I want to say that the electoral performance of RPI got affected due to factionalism, and also the hegemony of the Congress, which was very strong at the center as well as the state level. And because of this, they got resorted to the coalition politics, and they failed to emerge as an independent, strong political party of the marginalized community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sudhi, for your very enriching presentation, and which is also analytical. And if we have any question, you can address now. So I would like to ask Soumitra Babu, is there any question for Sudhi, Dr.
No,
Sudhi?
no, no, not for the moment. Not for the moment for Dr. Sudhi Mandloi. Not for the moment. We don't have any
Okay.
questions for the moment.
So
So
Dr.
we might
Sudhi,
as well. Yes, ma'am. You can continue.
yeah. So Mr. Soumitra Roy, sir, I would like to ask one question to Dr. Sudhi Mandloi, that if it's possible right now, then
Yes,
shall
of
I
course.
proceed?
Please, 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 please,
So,
please, ma'am.
Sudhi, you talked on the Republican Party of India crisis of Dalit politics in the post-Ambedkar era. So, have you addressed the gender issue in this regard, like how the Dalit women were being situated in this entire discourse, especially in this post-Ambedkar era, initially after the independence, and what is their status right now?
Actually, ma'am, during the time of colonial period, Ambedkar has tried to incorporate Dalit women also in many of his movement. But in post independence scenario, we have seen that they were actually marginalized, and they had to face the brunt of the Dalit patriarchy also. So in Dalit movement, we have noticed that they were not given enough opportunities to actually showcase their problems and issues. And it was only in the 1970s, when the Dalit Panther movement had begun, due to the failure of the RPI, when in 1970s the Dalit Panther movement had begun. Then we have seen the rise of the Dalit feminism, where the many Dalit women of Maharashtra and also the other states, they have started taking their agendas, their issues. But during this period, They were completely marginalized due to Dalit patriarchy also.
Thank you so much. Nice to hear from you.
Thank you,
Okay,
ma'am.
we next have Mr. Shombit Raichaudhuri, who is a student at Presidency University. And the topic that he's going to speak on is the crisis within, societal changes within the Muslim communities and ramifications in modern India. So, ma'am, with your permission, I'll let in Shombit Roy Chaudhary to make his
Yes.
presentation.
And Shombit, I heard that you have a presentation, right? PPT. So would you be like to show that PPT to us? Because
Yes, ma'am, I have shared the screen. Is it visible?
yeah,
Yes, please,
and
Shombit. Yes, please.
you will be having 5 to 6 minutes for your
Okay.
presentation, and please be on time. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank Bharatiya Vidya Charcha Kendra and the chair, Dr. Tinni Goswami, for giving me an opportunity to present on this esteemed platform. I will be speaking today on the crisis within societal changes within the Muslim communities and ramifications in modern India. Living together separately is a phrase which can be applied for understanding the Muslim communities in modern India. Let's unpack this phrase first. The question was an old one, yet universal. Whom should we obey, the God or the state? Taking sides would label the other as treacherous, but the demarcations are too difficult to erase. A popular Muslim leader announced in the previous decade that he had desired a state where every Muslim, no matter what their ethnic backgrounds, were all brothers, because the earth is Allah's and it is foolish to demarcate the people through boundaries. The speaker was former leader of the Daesh, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. The issue he was addressing was a concern for many Muslim statesmen in the past century. I would present two case studies. First, the larger picture, the concerns of the Shias and the Sunnis over the formation of a Muslim homeland, Muslim Qawm, that haunted them till the 1940s. And second, the correspondence between Muhammad Iqbal and Ahmadiyas and the interesting ramifications which unfolded. The 1930s was the decade the idea of a Muslim Qawm publicly germinated. In the 1930 Allahabad session of the All India Muslim League, Iqbal recited in English and said that he wanted to see a consolidated Northwest India of forming a separate Muslim state. But the crowd who had assembled to hear the favorite poet were disillusioned with all these prescriptions. The speech was unfathomable for them. The crowd demanded Iqbal to recite poetry in Urdu. First he was reluctant, but he had to subsume under pressure and recited unwillingly. It seemed that all his sayings went in vain, but that was not the case. As the years passed, Iqbal's audience transformed with time. Consequently, after the 1937 elections, Iqbal proposed that Bengal should be included in the emerging Muslim state. He wrote to Jinnah that he is the only Muslim who can guide the Muslims through these stormy paths. Iqbal was right in assessing that a tempest was coming, but he overlooked the tempest within the Muslim community. He advised Jinnah to ignore the Muslim minority provinces and focus on Northwest and Bengal. Perhaps Iqbal wanted to overlook that in those provinces, the Shia-Sunni conflict were making headlines. The question arose whether the All India Muslim League was a farce by name, and thus cropped up an All India Shia Conference, and in 1929 cropped up the All India Shia Political Conference. Its chief policy was to reject the League's misleading notion of a singular Muslim community. They were in favor of joint electorates, unlike League's separate electorates. The AISPC president Syed Wazir Hassan claimed that the League forced them towards the Congress, and he asked the Shia ulema to issue fatwas supporting the Congress. His son Ali Zahid joined the Congress and became the AISPC's most influential leader. Till now, it seemed that the Shia acumen of the subcontinent was equivocally against the League. Historically, the founding fathers of the League were prominent Shias like Aga Khan III, whom you can see in the picture, Muhammad Shah, Syed Amir Ali, and several others. There were nervousness, murmurs about the possible fate of the Shias in a possible Sunni-dominated land. But the Shias lacked a popular face like Maulana Azad or Maulana Madini, who could change the discourse against the dominant League. And the Shias were not a homogeneous community. The role of Aga Khan III was significant. On the one hand, he was the Imam of the Khojas, as well as the founder of the League. and on the other, he was navigating broadly by situating Khojas within the larger Muslim Ummah. His pan-Islamic conceptions were framed as an amalgamation of spiritual and cultural lines, though not without political ramifications, as argued by Shaumin Mukherjee. Aga Khan saw Jinnah as his ally for his ambitious model of broadening his sphere beyond the Ismaili border and was one of the greatest supporters of forming Pakistan. Now the second proposition. In 1934, Iqbal wrote Qadanis and Orthodox Muslims, demanding that the Qadanis should be declared a separate community. The Qadanis were the Ahmadiyas. In the following year, he wrote Islam and Ahmadism, arguing that the Ahmadiyas violate the Khatami Nubuwat, that is, Muhammad is the last prophet. Mirza Ghulam Ahmed, the founder of the Ahmadis, proclaimed that he was a Mujadid. And then he made the astonishing claim that he was the Muhaddad, who was in communication with Allah and his angels, and also the Masiah. Iqbal, also a native of Punjab, wrote this in a response to Jawaharlal Nehru, writing from jail in Almora, accusing Iqbal of his animosities with the Ahmadis, leading to his demand to separate Ahmadis from the Muslims. This conflict started when Iqbal resigned from the presidency of All India Kashmir Committee in 1933, accusing Ahmadis who were interested in only following the command of their caliph and not the president of the association they belonged to. This conflict led Iqbal to conclude that the Ahmadis were unfit for any constitutional structure. Jawaharlal Nehru accused Iqbal whether his biasness on the Aga Khan Young Turks were on political grounds. Did it not deviate from the way Iqbal saw Islam? Was the Ahmadiyya bashing solely on personal grounds? Iqbal categorically mentioned that Ahmadiyya deviated from the basic principles of Islam. But that was not the case with the Aga Khan. The Ismailis do believe in imamate, offering critical theological interpretation of Islam. The Aga Khan never claimed to be a prophet. But Mirza Ghulam Ahmed propagated himself as a prophet. According to Iqbal, a medieval mindset engaging in forgery, and overall it went against the Indian Muslims and the very idea of a global synthesis of Muslim states. Iqbal congratulated Mustafa Kemal, the Ataturk, for abolishing the caliphate, which was carrying a tag of a medieval Islamic apparatus. It was necessary to go beyond the imperial enigmas, even if nationalist ideas guided the path, as long as the basic Islamic principles were unharmed. Iqbal assessed that it is necessary to keep the spirit of Islam alive while Muslims were a minority, like the case in India. Through the establishment of a global league of Muslim nations, it would forge a common bond of Muslim aspirations by descending on merging, diverging individualities into a larger spectrum. Anything that posed a threat to this global unity should be obstructed, if necessary with a brute force, and Iqbal saw the Ahmadiyya question through this lens. In the conclusion, the 18th century marked the political dilution of imperial powers, Mughal, Ottoman, and Safavid, marking a phase of intellectual regeneration rather than decline, from the urge to reinterpret Islam in the changing circumstances. The exercise in engaging in ijtihad. The above cases and their complex outcomes, some are still in the process, reflect the conceptualization of Islam adapting to the circumstances. Gramsci wrote, all men are intellectuals, one could therefore say, but not all men have in the society the function of intellectuals. The category of intellectuals had widened unprecedentedly. The activity of an intellectual should be judged based on one's role in the society, not through one's profession. As Iqbal himself said that men and society are like a tide. Quote, when I'm rolling, I exist. When I rest, I am no more. And under this new stratum, all the above men, debating with each other, along with a whole lot of issues, are forming an Islamic repertoire with individual repositories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shomit, for your presentation. So, is there any question, Shomitra Babu, so that we can address that particular issue?
Comment on the.
Is there any question for Shomitra?
No, I don't see anything for the moment, ma'am. I don't see anything.
Okay.
Okay.
So, Shomit. Yes, sir. You please continue.
I just wanted to ask Shombit one question, and that is whether it would be possible to think that how much of religion does does actually become the driving force when you're thinking about the crisis? Is it only religion, or is it more of a power struggle which is there? Which of the two is the more deciding factor in your presentation? Would you kindly highlight on that, please?
I'm currently focusing on the Muslim aspect. So according to Aisha Jalal, that Jinnah did not want partition. And as you all know, that Jinnah was not a religious man. Means he was a completely westernized man, a pork-eating Shia Muslim. But at the first place, he was an Ismaili who converted to a mainstream Shia sect. So I think that yes, religious is the question. Religion is the question and the driving force behind the forming of Pakistan. And as I have said, in the 1930 All India Muslim League conference, Iqbal said that he wanted a separate Muslim land, the idea of millat. So religion, yes. Otherwise, why the term All India Muslim League? Did it represent the Muslims all over India? Is it a farce? And it is forming in Bengal. The All India Muslim League is has been formed in Bengal by Nawab Salimullah. But where the Bengal is not in the scenario in the first half of the 1930s. It is coming only after 1937 when the Krishak Praja Party and Shama Prasad Mukherjee is forming government in Bengal. So I think these things need to be taken into consideration.
So I would like to comment, like, as the title of your paper is the crisis within societal changes within the Muslim communities and ramifications in modern India. So when you were talking about this kind of cultural pluralities, you were talking about the communities, then you have to mention about what were those communities, whether you were talking about the Shias, the Sunnis, or or anyone else. And secondly, as you are talking about the crisis within, then the representation of the mass should be there. And the third observation which I have, you have to consult the archival sources as well, apart from the secondary sources. That means, like, you should consult the official reports and the documents to enrich your hypothesis. Thank you so much for your nice presentation and wish you best of luck for future.
So we have after this Mr. Sharkar, who is a research scholar at Jadavpur University, and her topic is নিবেদিত নিবেদিতম নাটকের প্রেক্ষিতে ঊনবিংশ শতকের নানাবিধ সংকট ও উত্তরণ, একটি সমীক্ষা।
গুড ইভিনিং স্যার অ্যান্ড ম্যাডাম, আমি আমার বক্তব্য শুরু করছি। আমার টপিকটা হলো যে নিবেদিত নিবেদিতম নাটকের প্রেক্ষিতে ঊনবিংশ শতকের নানাবিধ সংকট ও উত্তরণ, একটি সমীক্ষা। তো ডক্টর রমা চৌধুরীর নিবেদিত নিবেদিতম 1980 সালে রচিত একটি জীবনীমূলক সংস্কৃত নাটক। দ্বাদশ দৃশ্য বিশিষ্ট এই আলোচ্য নাটকে ঊনবিংশ শতকের একাধিক আর্থসামাজিক সংকটময় অবস্থার বিবরণ বিধৃত হয়েছে। ইতিহাস থেকে জানা যায় যে ঊনবিংশ শতকে ইংরেজ অধীনস্থ ভারতে পাশ্চাত্য যুক্তিবাদী ভাবধারা এবং গোড়া হিন্দু ধর্মের মধ্যে একটি সংঘাতের সৃষ্টি হয়েছিল। তো সেই সমকালে মাতৃ সাধক শ্রী রামকৃষ্ণ পরমহংসদেব ভারতবাসীকে এক সমন্বয়ী ধর্মপথের সন্ধান দিয়েছিলেন। তিনি বলেছিলেন, যত মত তত পথ, অর্থাৎ যে কোনো পথেই ঈশ্বরকে লাভ করা যায়। নাটকে দেখা গেছে যে শ্রী রামকৃষ্ণের মন্ত্রশিষ্য হিন্দু সন্ন্যাসী স্বামী বিবেকানন্দের ভাবাদর্শে অনুপ্রাণিতা নিবেদিতা সুদূর ইংল্যান্ড থেকে 1898 সালে ভারতে এসেছিলেন। তো নিবেদিতার ভারত আগমনের প্রধান উদ্দেশ্য ছিল যে নররূপী নারায়ণের সেবা করা। তো আসলে তৎকালীন পরাধীন ভারত তথা বাংলার মানুষ ছিল অত্যাচারিত, শোষিত, বঞ্চিত এবং লাঞ্ছিত। তো সমাজ ছিল সেই সময় অশিক্ষা, কুসংস্কার এবং অজ্ঞানতার অন্ধকারে নিমজ্জিত। তো ফলত সেখানে মেয়েদের অবস্থা আরো বেশি দুর্বিষহ ছিল। তো এমতাবস্থায় স্বামীজি ভারতের নারী সমাজের উন্নতিকরণে পুরুষ অপেক্ষা একজন তেজস্বিনী নারীর প্রয়োজন অনুভব করেছিলেন। মানবের কল্যাণার্থে নিবেদিত প্রাণ নিবেদিতাকে তিনি একটি পত্রে লেখেন, আমি কি সংস্কৃতে বলবো এই অংশটা? হ্যালো, হ্যাঁ। তো এই জগৎ আলোড়নকারিণী সত্যের নিন্দা আছে ক্রমসন্ধি চরণে বহুমুখী জনা। আগমস্যতি সরি। আচ্ছা, বয়ং কাময়ামহে বলিষ্ঠং বাক্যং বলিষ্ঠতবং কর্ম চ। হে মহাপ্রাণে উত্তিষ্ঠ জাগৃহি জগৎ সাম্প্রতং যন্ত্রণাদগ্ধং কিং শোভতে নিদ্রাত্বয়ী। বলছে যে যে জগৎ এই সময় খুবই যন্ত্রণাদগ্ধ। তো তোমার মধ্যে যে মহৎ প্রাণ রয়েছে, যে বলিষ্ঠ বাক্য বা জ্বলন্ত যে তোমার বাণী, সেই দিয়ে এই ভারতবর্ষের নারীদের উত্থানের জন্য তুমি কিছু করো। এই সময় নিদ্রা শোভা পায় না। তো প্রকৃত অর্থে উক্তি নিচয়ের মধ্যে দিয়ে ঊনবিংশ শতকের ভারতের যে কঠিন যন্ত্রণাময় পরিস্থিতির কথা প্রকাশ পেয়েছে তা নাটকে তুলে ধরা হয়েছে। আচ্ছা, সেই কালে ভারতবাসীর দুঃখ, কষ্ট, দাসত্বর যে এক করুণ দৃশ্য তা নাটকের পঞ্চম দৃশ্যে দেখানো হয়েছে। শ্রী শ্রী রামকৃষ্ণের যে পত্নী শারদা মা, তার সঙ্গে এক মহিলা ভক্ত তিনি কথোপকথন করছেন। সেই মহিলা ভক্ত সেই মাকে বলছেন যে অশেষ ক্লেশ ক্লেদম মথিতম অধন্যং মম জীবনম, অর্থাৎ বলছে যে আমার যে অধন্য জীবন, আমি অবলা নারী, শিক্ষা নেই, দীক্ষা নেই, হ্যাঁ, তো আমি এই জীবনে আর কি করব, তো এইভাবে আমি কিভাবে বা ঈশ্বরের সাধনা করব। তো এইরকম চিত্রগুলো ফুটে উঠছে যে ঊনবিংশ শতকে একজন নারীর কি অবস্থা, কি শোচনীয় করুণ অবস্থা। তো যাই হোক, তো সেখান থেকে তো মা তো রামকৃষ্ণ দেবের বাণী উচ্চারণ করে তাকে শান্ত করেছেন, কিন্তু সেটাই তো সব নয়, তো তাদের তো শিক্ষিতও করতে হবে। তো সেই জন্য সেই সময় কি হলো যে যে আমাদের যে নিবেদিতা, তিনি যে কন্যারা রয়েছেন তাদের হিতার্থে একটি বিদ্যালয়, বালিকা বিদ্যালয় খুললেন। সেটা সময়টা হচ্ছে 1898 সালের 13ই নভেম্বর। তো নাটকের সপ্তম দৃশ্য তো এইভাবেই আর কি ঊনবিংশ শতকের যে সংকটময় সমস্যাগুলো আর কি প্রকট হচ্ছে নাটকে। তো এইরকমই আরেকটি দৃশ্য, সপ্তম দৃশ্য, সেখানে বর্ণিত হয়েছে এক মহামারীর কথা, যেটা ঘটেছিল 1898 সালের মে মাসে কলকাতাতে। হ্যাঁ, তো মানুষ সেই সময় প্লেগে আক্রান্ত হয়েছে এবং ভীষণ এক মহামারীর পরিস্থিতি তখন। তো ভয়াবহ মারণ রোগে কলকাতার জনজীবন বিপর্যস্ত। এইরকম সময় কি হলো যে উচ্চ নিম্ন বর্ণের যে একটা ভেদাভেদ, মনুষ্যত্বের যে অবক্ষয়, অস্পৃশ্যতার যে কুফল সেই সময় ঘটেছিল, সেগুলো কিন্তু খুব প্রকট হয়েছে। তো নাটকে এরকমটাও দেখানো হয়েছে যে সেই সময় ইস্ট বেঙ্গলে যে আমাদের যে সরকার রয়েছেন, ইংরেজ সরকার রয়েছেন, তারা কিন্তু সাধারণ মানুষ, ধনী দরিদ্র মানুষ যারা, তাদের কথা একেবারেই ভাবছে না। তো সেই সময় কি হলো, তো এবং আরো যেটা ঘটেছিল যে সেই সময় যুব সমাজ একদমই সাধারণ মানুষের কথা চিন্তা করছে না, তারা যে যার নিজের মতন আছে, ধনী সম্প্রদায়ের যে সমস্ত মানুষেরা। তো যুব সমাজকে তাদের কার্যে মানে যথোপযুক্তভাবে দেশের যে কাজ হওয়া উচিত সেই বিষয়ে প্রণোদিত করার জন্য যেন সেই নিবেদিতা, স্বামী বিবেকানন্দ এরা নিজেরাই সেই আক্রান্ত মানুষদেরকে কিন্তু পাশে দাঁড়ালো। তো তারা স্বতঃপ্রণোদিতভাবে রোগীদের সেবা শুশ্রূষা, ওষুধপত্র এই সমস্ত কিছু দিলেন। আর বিশেষত এই সময় যেটা ঘটেছিল একটা স্মরণীয় ঘটনা, যেটা কিনা নিবেদিতা স্বয়ং সেই কলকাতার বাগবাজারের যে পথঘাট পরিষ্কারের দায়িত্ব নিয়েছিলেন। তো সেই সময় এইভাবে কি ঘটেছিল যে যুব সমাজকে কিন্তু তিনি রোগীদের যত্নের জন্য উৎসাহিত করেছিলেন। তো এইভাবে একটা ঘটনা ঘটলো। আবার তো এই সময় যেটা আরো যে বিষয়, সেই সময় মানুষজনের মধ্যে একটা দ্বিধা বা দেশীয় যে জিনিস, দ্রব্য, শিল্পদ্রব্য বা ভাস্কর্য, শিল্প, সাহিত্য, এই বিভিন্ন বিষয়েও সাধারণ মানুষের বা যারা কিছুটা শিক্ষিত সেই সমস্ত মানুষের কিন্তু একটা অবহেলা লক্ষ্য করা গিয়েছে। তো তারা যেটা বলা হচ্ছে যে 100 বছরের পরাধীনতার গ্লানি দেশের মানুষকে জড়গ্রস্ত করে তুলেছিল। তাই ইংরেজ শাসনে ভারতের যে উচ্চতর শিল্প সাহিত্যের প্রসার বহুলাংশে ব্যাহত হয়েছিল। আচ্ছা, স্বদেশী দ্রব্য, শিল্প, সাহিত্য, ভাস্কর্যের প্রতি বহুদিনের যে জড়তা, ঔদাসীন্যের মধ্য দিয়ে যে মূল্যবোধের যে এক সংকট দেখা দিয়েছিল, তা কিন্তু নাটকে প্রকাশিত হয়েছে। এবং সেই বিষয়গুলো থেকে কিভাবে বেরিয়ে আসা যেতে পারে সেই সময়, সেইগুলো কিন্তু নাটকে আলোকপাত করা হয়েছে। তো এরকম বিভিন্ন কর্মকাণ্ডের মধ্যে দিয়ে নাট্যকার তো একটা অঙ্গুলি সংকেত করেছেন ঊনবিংশ শতকের ভারতের যে সমস্যা সংকুল বিষয়গুলি, এবং তারই সঙ্গে একটা উত্তরণেরও পথ দেখিয়েছে। এইভাবে আমার আর কি এই আমার যে প্রবন্ধ, সেখানে এই ইতিহাস এবং নাটকের একটা সংমিশ্রণ এর প্রতি একটা আলোচনা করা হয়েছে। নমস্কার, থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ আপনাকে এত সুন্দর একটি মননশীল, গবেষণাধর্মী এবং প্রাসঙ্গিক উপস্থাপনার জন্য। তা কোনো প্রশ্ন আছে সৌমিত্র বাবু? শর্মিষ্ঠা সরকার
এখনো দেখতে পাচ্ছি না, আমি এখানে কিছু দেখতে পাচ্ছি না। হ্যাঁ, কোনো প্রশ্ন আমি কমেন্ট বক্সে দেখতে পাচ্ছি না আপাতত। ম্যাম, আপাতত দেখতে পাচ্ছি।
শর্মিষ্ঠা, আপনাকে আমার একটা প্রশ্ন রয়েছে। প্রশ্ন ঠিক নয়, আমার সীমিত জ্ঞান থেকে আমার মনে হয় যে একটা মানে জানার ইচ্ছে, একটা অনুসন্ধিৎসা, সেই জায়গা থেকে বলছি যে আপনি নিবেদিতম নাটকের প্রেক্ষিতে ঊনবিংশ শতকের নানাবিধ সংকট এবং উত্তরণের বিষয়ে আলোচনা করেছেন। তা আপনি যদি এই নাটকটি রচনার ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ড বা প্রেক্ষাপট সম্পর্কে একটু বলেন, যে কে রচনা করেছিলেন, এবং এই নাটকটা যদি মঞ্চস্থ হয়ে থাকে তাহলে সেটা কোথায় মঞ্চস্থ হয়েছিল, এবং সে ব্যাপারে আমরা সমসাময়িক সংবাদপত্রে কি ধরনের কোনো রিভিউ পেয়েছিলাম কিনা, এবং তার পপুলার রেসপন্সটা কি হয়েছিল, সেটা যদি আপনি একটু হাইলাইট করেন, আমার মনে হয় যে আপনার আলোচনা আরো সর্বাঙ্গীন হয়ে উঠবে।
থ্যাংক ইউ ম্যাডাম, আমি এই বিষয়গুলো আরো অনেক বেশি ভালো করে আলোকপাত করব। এমনিতে একদম প্রথমেই বলেছি 1980 সালে রমা চৌধুরী, ডক্টর রমা চৌধুরীর লেখা, এবং ডক্টর রমা চৌধুরী সঠিক পরিচয় মানে আমার জানা আছে কিন্তু এই মুহূর্তে মনে পড়ছে না। কোনো এক জায়গার অধ্যাপিকা, অনেক তিনি নাটক নিয়ে এবং গবেষণামূলক অনেক কাজ করেছেন, অনেক ধরনেরই কাজ করেছেন। তো আমি সেইগুলো অবশ্যই এই অংশগুলোতে তুলে ধরব, তার ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ড যেটা নাটকের।
ধন্যবাদ, অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ। So we can proceed towards our next speaker.
Next speaker is Dr. Devamitra Chakraborty, a very dear colleague of mine. I'm getting to see Devamitra. Hi, Devamitra, after a very long time. She is assistant professor at Dr. Bhupendranath Datta Smriti Mahavidyalaya, and she shall be making a presentation on representing Mukti Juddha on Indian stage, a study of Utpal Dutt's two plays. So, ma'am, with your permission, we shall be having Dr. Devamitra Chakraborty.
Yes, am I audible?
Yes, perfectly. Just keep up to the time, please.
Of course, I'll try. Even I'm having sore throat, so I have to do it. Okay, good evening, everyone. The topic of my presentation today is representing Mukti Juddha on Indian stage, a study of Utpal Datta's two plays. So from the very topic, I would like to say that my focus is on two things, two words as reflected in the title. One is Mukti Juddha and the other is the Indian stage. And to understand these two words, I have chosen two plays of Utpal Datta, that is Thikana and Joy Bangla. The two nation states of India and Bangladesh won freedom after partition. Indian partition in 1947 led to the formation of Pakistan with two wings, West Pakistan and East Pakistan. However, East Pakistan revolted against the imperialism of their Western counterpart, and finally Pakistan was partitioned to form Bangladesh in 1971. India played a dominant role in the war of liberation of the people of Bangladesh. The Bengali community in India, that is the people who lived in West Bengal, shared the feeling of their eastern counterpart in Bangladesh, also called East Bengal. Utpal Datta's two plays, Thikana and Joy Bangla, bring on this Bengali stage the spectacle of the rise of common masses against imperialistic forces to earn freedom. And significantly, both the plays were written in the year 1971. And this year, 2001, we actually commemorate 50 years of Bangladesh War of Liberation. That is, this is the 50th year of their freedom struggle and independence. So this issue is very contemporary at present, very relevant at present to understand the situation of partition, bloodshed, nationhood, and others. However, I stick my paper to stage only, the representation of the war. The division of the Bengali ethnic group, both at the time of Indian independence and Bangladesh war, was actually violence perpetrated upon the population. To put in Nitish Gupta's words, in spite of a common language of which every Bengali is proud, a shared culture and lifestyle, and a common history for at least 1,000 years, Bengal was irretrievably partitioned between two sovereign countries. It was only the emergence of an independent Bangladesh in 1971 which partially restored the old historic pattern. If Indian partition evokes a memory of violence on religious grounds, the partition of Pakistan invokes the pictures of the carnage of Bengalis, both Hindus and Muslims. The struggle for liberation had its base on the identity division and was firmly linked to language and culture. To quote Amartya Sen's words, and thus the revolt was the outcome of neglect, which can be reason enough for resentment, but a sense of encroachment, degradation, and humiliation can be even easier to mobilize for rebellion and revolt. I again quote Amartya Sen's words, and this is very true when we think back or commemorate Bangladesh War of Independence 50 years after. Utpal Lotta's Thikana is written in the backdrop and the play pivots around the character of Rashida Khatun, who apparently runs a tea stall, but in reality is a revolutionary. The play presents a spectacle of suffering and agony of the common people of Bangladesh under the Pakistani rule. Rashida Khatun is a proletariat who has the potency to challenge the imperialist. Rashida does not even hesitate to sacrifice her life to earn freedom. Now we come to the characters of the play. This is very important, crucial to understand the dramaturgy of Utpal Datta, the theatre of Utpal Datta. And we will find that the characters of Utpal Datta actually is presented or taken from the entire galaxy or all walks of life, from different hues, and mostly from the working class. Rashida Nani runs a tea stall, is a proletariat. Makbul is a revolutionary. Hasibun is a boy at a tea stall. Dr. Anisuzzaman, he is a doctor. Sahabuddin, owner of a jute mill. Jamini Sen, actor. Hasmat Ali, clerk at bank. And Colonel Waliullah and others from the Pakistan Army. Now this play actually presents a short saga where the Pakistan army actually takes up all the characters like Hasibun, Anisuzzaman, Shahabuddin Chaudhary, Yamini Sen, Hasmat Ali. They have come to Nani's tea stall to have some tea, and they are taken up by the army all of a sudden without any fault of their own, and finally they are tried for no fault and they are killed after a farcical trial. This actually highlights the farcical trial and the brutality that the Pakistan army actually perpetrated upon the Bengali-speaking people without giving any reason. Okay, and the technique that was followed in this play was Western because there was the use of lights and sound. Now coming to the next play, that is Joy Bangla. Joy Bangla is not a theatre proper not a theatre for the proscenium stage, but it is a Jatrapala, a typical Bengali folk theatre. Okay, now Jatrapala, Utpal Datta asserts, is a unique theatre form in Indian performing tradition, which comprises the audience comprises multitude of people coming from all walks of life, and it has an alternate of cold scenes and warm scenes. And what is the essence of Jatra? Unlike our theater, stay proscenium theater, is the exuberance of emotions. So when Thikana presents to us the suffering of the Bengali speaking people and their revolt in a constrained manner, Joy Bangla has an exuberance of emotion and an overwhelming appeal to the common people to rise against the tyranny of Pakistan regime. And even here the characters are again taken from host of characters coming from different walks of life. We have a guerrilla fighter, his wife, his son, a lieutenant from Bengal regiment, a money lender, his wife, his son, a Maulvi, his daughter, and the Pakistani soldiers. Now this paper actually tries to study and explore the finding. I come straight to the findings by Utpal Datta. This paper actually tells us that Utpal Datta's plays were a propaganda actually for the necessity to struggle against imperialist forces in both the plays. According to the dramatist, freedom means liberty from imperialism and not from one regime or the other. And the characters actually are very important in Utpal Datta's dramaturgy because again repeat, they comprise of both the proletariat class and the bourgeois class. And here, actually, Utpal Datta shows that if one is essentially a bourgeois or bourgeoisie, then he will go and join hands with the bourgeoisie class, because the money lender in Joy Bangla and the jute mill owner in Thikana, they actually betray their own Bengali brother and join hands with the bourgeois. Okay, whereas the proletariat class, they are ready to sacrifice themselves, give the supreme sacrifice, even their life, for the sake of their country. And finally, as I said, that I'll be concentrating on two things, that is Mukti Juddha and Indian stage. These two plays definitely form a part of the post-colonial theatre where Utpal Datta, I quote Helen Gilbert and Joanna Tompkins, Utpal Datta's work has presented a way not only of indigenizing the imperial canon, that is, here canon means the theatre canon, but also of disrupting its cultural clout. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Debumitra, for your very much enriching and enlightening presentation. So if we have any questions to Dr. Chakraborty, then we can.
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. No. We will say Debumitra because of her voice. And
thank you, Shomitra.
Okay, we can spare you because you're suffering from a sore throat. Well, ma'am, if you wish to ask anything.
Yes, yes. Any question, please.
It's not a question, ma'am. Actually, as you were talking about a situation like where you are talking to imply the post-colonial structure in regard of the theatre, and which is also very much political, and you have also chosen two plays by Utpal Datta, Joy Bangla, and the name of the other play is Thikana. So, ma'am, do you think that here can we imply the post-modern structure of discourses through which we can have a particular idea or try to have a particular, what I can say, idea regarding any kind of cultural hegemony, or as why you have chosen the plays of Utpal Datta especially? So do you like to connect these two divergent arenas together, that on the one hand I'm saying that is it possible to imply the post-modernist ideas, or you know, that relating cultural hegemony by Gramsci, or especially why you have chosen Utpal Datta? Do you find anything in regard of that?
No, we cannot say that post-modern technique, because if I consider theatre, I'm speaking from the perspective of theatre, Utpal Datta's plays are actually a writing back to the colonial canon by virtue that he has actually changed the concept of jatra, making it political. But we can't say that it's postmodern in that sense, because postmodern, we know it's a completely different perspective where you actually it's not a postmodern theater. It needs a detailed discussion in that sense, but it's post-colonial theater, writing back to the canon, and of course changing the meaning of jatra, which was just a means of entertainment in the earlier days. And here Dotto, since he is a political person and he is a propagandist, he actually takes this vehicle to go and connect to the masses. Otherwise, city theatre, that is the proscenium theatre, which was definitely a byproduct of the colonial regime, is confined to the city stage, and of course to very much in the muffasil with the group theatres that was coming out over there. And another great exponent of this is Badul Sarkar, who has expanded the third theatre, doing away with the proscenium stage. But we cannot specifically say that it's a postmodern theatre in that sense, considering the different theatre movements in the modern age. And the second question that you have asked is, why have I chosen Utpal Dotto? Definitely from the perspective of post-colonial writer, interrogating or changing the Bengali stage so as to be a very indigenous and genuine artist in that sense. Another thing is, of course, the 50 years of Bangladesh War of Independence. This is 2021. These were the some things that were running at the back of my mind while I was preparing the paper. Yes.
Thank you so much for your erudite presentation, and would like to hear more from you. So
thank you.
In future.
Okay. My pleasure.
Now I would like to invite the last speaker.
Yeah, the last speaker for today is Mr. Shaptor Sushil, who has been waiting for quite some time. He's a student at Scottish Church College, and the topic that he's chosen is Famines in Colonial India, the Response and Reactions of East India Company and British Government, a study. May I please request Shaptor to begin and to keep up to the time of 5 to 8 minutes, please. We are really stuck for time. Shaptor, please.
Thank you, ma'am. At first, I would like to say good evening, everyone, all and over present here. Good evening to all the dignitaries. This is Shaptor Sushil from Scottish Church College. Today, the topic of my presentation is Famines in Colonial Bengal, the Responses and Reaction of East India Company and British Government. At first, I would like to say, what is a crisis? In the late Middle English, the word crisis got a chance to enter into the English dictionary from the Greek krinein or crisis. But during the evolution of the word, probably it was not known to the word as well, that with the flow of centuries, the usage of this word would increase to signify different situations of the problems of individuals, of a community or a society. But history is a discipline that keeps a record of the incidents with the flow of time, and hence it came under the historian spectacles too. But a crisis can come through many ways. It can be a personal crisis, crisis of a community, or a societal crisis as well. Generally, natural calamities can create crises too that can affect the history of mankind. History of colonial Bengal also witnessed this type of crisis. A famine is a community crisis conflagrated by a widespread scarcity of food. It is defined in terms of malnutrition, mortality, and hunger, which are materialized through a set of economic, nutritional, and social symptoms and signs with complex and correlated nets of causation that lead to support marginal members who either migrate due to the scarcity of food or starve to death or die of starvation-related diseases. Famines involve droughts and ecological decline which interact with the socio-economic realities as well. So an intrinsic feature of a famine is that a regional scale phenomena resulting from complex concentration of spatial processes such as deforestation, drought, war, flood, crop failure, population imbalance, and governmental policies as well. A famine has long-term effects on a community. That's why, due to abnormal social and environmental conditions, produce a breakdown in normal social relations takes place and highly dysfunctional behavioral responses. In our discussion, we would mainly focus on the reactions of East India Company as well as the British government to the famines. This is the famine map of colonial India, which showcases the different times and different regions of the famines in India. Generally, we will focus more on the Bengal case. According to Morton 2000, famine was a pervasive phenomenon in India between 1707 and 1943, as 23 severe famines and many more episodes of shortages of food occurred. Though in Odisha report, para 13 from a writing of A. Loveday, we can be aware about that extraordinary little information are there about the famine. And during the British East India Company's rule, the Great Bengal Famine of 1770 and 1783 was witnessed by the people of Bengal. And the famines during the rule of British government, there were several famines like the famine of 1863, 1873, 1892, and up to 1943 to 44, we had witnessed several famines. John Fiske, in his book The Unseen World, wrote that the famine of 1770 in Bengal was far deadlier than the Black Plague that terrorized Europe in the 14th century. And according to A. Loveday, nor indeed was the position of the company in Bengal in 1770 so long assured that they could boast any sort of efficient administration. The double unworkable and merely gave great opportunities found an regulation. According to the Clive's policy and this graph that shows the gross revenue, the revenue that collected by the East India Company from Bengal before the terrible famine of 1768, this can portray the policy of East India Company during the famines. Generally, one of the most striking features of the policy of East India Company is a gulf of distance, which severs their promises and their good wishes from the work they actually perform. Thus, in February 1770, the government wrote to the resident of Murshidabad that he might be assured of their concurrence in every measure for the relief of the poor and earnestly recommended him take every step towards the purpose. Yet in June, the resident himself writes that 6 in every 16 had died. Similarly, in November 1769, if we follow the archival record, we can see the court of directors asserted, quote, we have taken and shall pursue every means in our power to relieve the miserable situation. The poor inhabitants must be involved in the form of dreadful calamity. But many scholars had told that this is an unwise and ungenerous steps. Besides, in case of 1784, there can be but little doubt that the company had been seriously frightened by the final effects of the 1770 disaster. But again, they had not taken the steps wisely. And that's why the 1784 famine can't be prevented. Though a committee of brain was established for the Bengal districts with full powers to control trade and prices and establish granaries when it seemed advantageous. Unfortunately, the calamity of 1783 that differed widely from that of 1770, and those methods which might conceivably have been wise in the former were merely aggravating in the later case. Now, if we move on to the reactions during British government, we can see the next the famines that happened. Lord Lytton, when he had come to India, he had went for and he gave different visits in famine sites, and famine commissions were also formed. But whenever the Prime Minister of England was informed about the famine, he said that famines or no famine, Indians will breed like rabbits. Whenever the sketches of the famines were sent to him, he said that why not Gandhiji is not dying in this famine. That is very cruel, that portrays the very cruel nature of the famine. There are some glimpses of the urban and rural face of the famines. And according to Steele, if we look upon the analysis of Steele, we can see that Salisbury was shocked at the tone of the newspapers in India that catered for the British official and business communities. They described famine as a salutary cure for overpopulation. That bears the same tone of Churchill. একেবারেই চার্চিলের মতো একেবারেই সেম টোন, কিন্তু স্ট্যাটিস্টিক্যাল এভিডেন্স বা হিস্টোরিক্যাল ট্রুথ দেখলে সেক্ষেত্রে জেমস টাইবেকি or what যদি আমরা work দেখি, we can get some ideas about these famines. But most evidence does account for the event, that is the famines did occur. However, there is an absence of historical statistical estimates. That is it's a very important problem to deal with this type of works. Besides that, if we look upon the Plumper and Newmare's work, we can see that they had used the selectorate theory to describe the governmental inaction about the famines. Besides, if we see the works of Amartya Sen, he had also informed that no famine has even taken place in the history of the world in a functioning democracy. So here we can smell the taste of the authoritarianism of the British government as well. So these are the several analyses. As my time time is quite over, so we can end over here. So this is all about the famines in colonial India and the response and the reactions of both East India Company and the British government.
Thank you, Shoptoshi. Am I pronouncing it rightly? Shoptosho or Shoptoshi?
Shoptosho. Shoptosho, ma'am.
Yes, Shoptosho, thank you for your presentation. So if we have any question, then you can enlighten us regarding that. Soumitra Babu, is there any question for Shoptosho?
No, there are no questions. There are no questions, and I think we have completely run out of time. So I need to thank first Shoptosho for having the heart to make a presentation after all that great.
That is really commendable.
Well done, young man. And I can't thank you enough, Tini ma'am, for being part of this enterprise for such a long length of time, for sparing your very valuable time. It's been an honor first listening to you and then having you up on the stage for this session. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the first day. We extend a very heartfelt gratitude to both Dr. Saurav Kumar Rai and Dr. Tindi Goswami. We wish all of you a very good night, a very nice good night, and we'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. with the first session of the second day. Good night. Good night, everybody.